All right, so today we're going to learn about the Aztecs. So, here we go. Their government, they had city-states, and then each city-state had their own government and their own culture. So that's what's different about the Aztecs as to the Mayans. Mayans were all like one group, and they all had one government, but the Aztecs, whatever city-state they were in, and at one time there were 489 city-states, they all had their own government. Each city-state, though, did have to pay tribute and taxes to the empire, and we're going to talk about tribute in a little bit. So there was a council of nobles, and they got to choose the emperor from members of the royal family. So they still had a ruler over everyone, but they still had their each individual governments. So the emperor, he was the one that kind of was in charge of the military, and he would choose and station them throughout the empire, and that's how he maintained control of everyone. And then he got to choose a great noble to command each army, and they were the governor as well. So most offices, it says, were hereditary. So what that means is, like, if your father was a military commander, you're kind of born into it. So sorry, the dogs are barking. So they're born into it, and which is also like the Mayans, but they also still have to serve the emperor. Their religion, the Aztecs also worshipped many gods and goddesses, but each village had a god of its own, and each job had a god of its own. So there would be, for instance, a god of military, a god of farming. Each different job had their own god. And then each village or tribe also had their own gods. And they also worshiped gods just like the Mayans did to attract good forces of nature. So to help with their crops and, to have a good season. But also they believed in worshiping gods to repel harmful powers, so to keep them safe. They were very big into festivals. In fact, they had a different festival every month, and it sounds like a blast because they would have music and dancing and parades, all different types of ways to celebrate. But they also had animal sacrifices during that time, just like the Mayans did. The Aztecs, which is different from the Mayans, they believed in human sacrifices. So that's what another way of tribute, like we were talking about earlier, not only did they sacrifice animals, but the ultimate sacrifice was sacrificing humans. No, thank you. So their social structure, they had large family groups, and they were called kalpoli, which means big house. And each kalpoli owned a section of land in which they farmed to meet the needs of its members. So each family, they just picture like this huge farm, and they're in charge of all the land on their farm. But the food isn't just for them. They still have to like donate it to the government. They still have to, raise it to help other people. And a portion, think of it as like taxes. They had to give a portion to the government as harvest tribute. So the Aztecs believed in 5 main social classes, which were the emperor, nobles, merchants, commoners, and slaves. So the emperor is like the royal family. They had one ruler, but their wives also held a high position. The nobles were people like priests or military officers, government leaders. They still had a decent amount of power. Merchants were people that imported goods. And commoners, they worked in the field. And so commoners, most people were commoners. And then slaves, of course, they could be sold into slavery. So with the technology, the Aztecs actually had impressive architecture. So they built a whole bunch of different structures, and they were like palaces. Picture like a palace. So one of the famous ones that they built was like a sacrificial temple, and 20,000 people a year were sacrificed there to their gods. Picture, I know I keep saying picture for some reason, but think of like a pyramid, but it has a flat top. So that's sort of like the architecture that they designed and created back then to make these temples. But they also made actual palaces, which were 2-story buildings, and then it had a courtyard in the center. It was extremely extravagant. It had gold all over, gold panels, gold paintings, and then it had like 4 main rooms: a reception chamber, the emperor's personal apartment, large meeting rooms, and then a tribute room. Obviously, these palaces were only for the select few, the people in power, the emperor, his family, and not all of their houses looked like this. For their agricultural practices, they believed that their group of people, that they were the chosen people of the sun, and they thought it was their duty to supply the sun with food to keep the sun happy, so that they could have, like I said, a good harvest. They could maintain their entire society with food and to be able to pay the government. So how they fed the sun was with human sacrifices. So they believed without human sacrifice, there would be no earth, no life, or no future. Their kingdom was also called the world of the fifth sun, because they thought the world had been destroyed and created 4 times. So that is also, it was kind of run by fear. They were afraid of the sun, and they didn't want the world to end again or the world to be destroyed. They didn't want to displease the sun. So that's why the sun played such an important role in their world. And lastly, for agriculture, they created floating gardens, and it's called Sinampa, if I'm saying that correctly. They basically built gardens with a rectangular base on lake beds so that they could have enough water for their crops. And they were literally like floating islands or gardens just for their crops in order to get water. Remember that with the Mayans, they did an irrigation system because water, they experienced a lot of droughts. So water was hard to come by for them. So, and that's how they sustain their life, is through their crops. So they had to become very creative with how they got enough water to grow all of their crops. Other products or cool things about the Aztecs: school was actually a really big thing, and all children were educated at home for the first 10 years of their life, and after that time they could attend school. So just think, that would be you guys like just going to school for the first year right now. They trained them, though, they trained all children as young as 4 to take on like big responsibilities. They gave them a job or taught them different things, because remember, they're born into their social structure, so they already know what they're going to do with their life once they are born. So they try to teach them responsibility and tricks of the trade of whatever their social structure is. Other things they learned about in school: they learned about the workings of the calendar, which remember the Mayans made, religion, songs, poetry, history, speech, law, military, writing, the art of war, and trade. So some of this is, common in today's schools, but some of it, obviously, we don't learn about. It's interesting to me that they had poetry even back then that the kids were studying. The assignment for Aztecs, I'm going to read to you a little bit of more information about the Aztecs on an ed puzzle, and there are going to be some creative questions that go with the video that you guys will have to answer.